Hi, everybody, and good evening to you. Here, it's a bit late here in Finland, but okay. Um, the idea is to make this available to as many people as for whom it might be possible. So in the United States and in South America, it certainly is possible, and in Europe, it's more or less possible, depending on interest. And I think if you're an early bird in the South Pacific, then you can make it. And otherwise, we'll have this, available on Makara and who knows where else, maybe sometime on YouTube, perhaps. Well, okay, this has been quite a project for me. I've written 2 books more or less on this subject, and one is the book I wrote back finishing in '86 called Infinitization or was it 96, I guess, Infinitization of Selfhood. And I drew some limits for myself when I made that book. I mean, I break through the limits on occasion, but pretty much I confine myself to what might be able to go on within a universe. And then in the book on the monad, I readopted Master DK's language just to get it to all fit together in a language that we are familiar with, perhaps. And in this book, which is Seeds of the Infinite, I'm pulling the stops out. I'm not worried about it. Let's just see where the thought process goes. So a lot of it is speculative, of course, and it's a little bit extra universal, you might say. In other words, it deals quite a bit, at least with certain subjects, on what happens when there's no universe. And by universe, I mean the outbreathing of the great breath, which I consider to be a finite thing, a finitude. I call it that, even though its essence is absolute in a way. So I take a look at speculatively the supra universal world or worlds and the realm of absolute infinity, because if you study infinity, what you're going to see is that it has there are greater and lesser infinities, and things keep going, but you have these canalized, insulated infinities. They don't mix with others, and yet they're infinite after their own kind and infinite in their own right. And yet you're always, every time you have one of those, you're leaving out the entire content, almost the entire content of absolute infinity. So I think the subject can drive you a little crazy, but on the other hand, I'm not worried about that. Too late for that now. I just think that when we get a sense that there is an ultimate reality, and well, maybe we cannot deal with the ultimate reality while in the universal state. It would have to be a super-universal or post-universal state when it would only be one thing. It wouldn't be a we at all. But let's just say we then could deal with the ultimate reality. But right here in universe, as it were, in that outbreathing, in that projection of the tiniest portion of absolute infinity selected by the absolute deity, I'm calling it that, for instantiation or demonstration in a finite universe. Even in that tiny little thing, it's huge to us. And if we can get a sense of the beingness, whatever, of the universal God, the God of the universe, who is not different from ourselves, then we're coming along, and we're a lot closer to the naked, unveiled truth of what we are, rather than identifying with the form of what we are. Now, yeah, I'm involved in two types of curricula. One is for the relative world, and Master DK and the Ageless Wisdom takes us very far, more than we can ever absorb, into that world of relativity, dealing with the relations of many things. So who would choose anything better than cosmic fire or esoteric astrology or rays and the initiations to give us that sample of how to deal with the relative world? However, there's also another curriculum that leads to the monad, and it is the curriculum of being. And I've said this before, and really, if you're studying with me on these matters and you're doing your duty by the blue books, then you're involved in two curricula, and each one of them reinforces the other. I think there's no way, if we all really study and enter into this world of the one and the final zero and all of that, there's no way that it will not enhance our sense of light, love, and power in the relative world. So I don't think it's futile at all. I think it's absolutely necessary, and basically the monad strikes its conscious chord at the third initiation. We're all going to have to pass through that. We're going to have to ascend into the world of the monad. The real ascension is the sixth initiation, and beyond that point, we're consciously identified as being, and it cannot be taken away from us, and on we go to the very height of the universe, and however many quadrillions or sextillions or nonillions or whatever. I once tried to calculate. I mean, it was a dumb exercise, but it was kind of fun. I took something from the old commentary, and I said, okay, based on this and the analogies that were found there about 1 hour of cosmic time, 1 second of cosmic time, I tried to make the calculation, and I came up with something like some kind of figure with 89 or 90 zeros after it for the duration of our particular cosmos or universe. Of course, it's a totally erroneous figure, but it was great to follow it out and realize what a stupendous amount of time, as we understand time, any on Earth here, any being will have to go forth in emanation from its identity as the universal logos, and to become extremely minimized and buried in matter or other lesser emanations, and then return. So, we have it's almost like it's infinite. Some people use the word infinite in a very loose way, and they mean a great deal of time, but we don't use it that way. But in the loose way of using it, you could say, oh, will this ever end? I mean, it seems like it will go on forever, but it has been going on forever. And when you start to deal with these concepts, you are going to stimulate the monastic permanent atom and the abstract mind. Over here, this is what's going to get stimulated. And it's probably coming out of the antichoronic approach that's from the egoic lotus, and not the antichoronic approach that's bypassing the egoic lotus. But whatever gets us to the abstract mind is all to the good, especially for the next 2,000 years, when it's not so much the intuition that is going to be cultivated, though many will be cultivating it, as the abstract mind. In the root race number 5, subrace 6, it is the cultivation of the abstract mind, and there's no way to deal with these subjects except to deal with what we call the abstract mind, where one symbol can stand for many concrete instantiations, examples, we might say. So, on we go. This is my last book on the subject, but it seems like it'll take forever to write. And, if you bear with me over the years, because it will take years, it may be that the factor of infuception, the type of perception we're calling infuception, which in universe is the self-perception of the universal logos, may begin in our own very small way to dawn upon our consciousness, and we will be enriched in that many words at which the Tibetan hints, or many states at which he hints, will begin to become more real. He kind of dropped hints here and there about all of this and about the oneness and all that, but he followed out the more wise and practical course, from which we are not excused by any means. We have to learn all of the details. After all, the second ray that we're largely functioning under is the ray of meticulous entirety, and DK has laid it out. Meticulous entirety, and he's going to start again with astrology around the year 2025, and who knows how long this next teaching will last. But we can be sure, because of the master he is, that it will be given with meticulous entirety, and we're not excused from learning according to that method. At the same time, there is the Antikarana, there is the monad, there is pure being, there is isness, and, to put all the pieces together is something that we are obliged to do as well. So, I'm glad you're here and joining us here at number 33. It's pretty good, and I like that number. Just say hi to Anne and Antoinette and Brennan and Carl and Carla and Catherine and Francis, Francis Donald and Francis Wilkinson, Frederick, Jeff, Helen and Helene, Ishtar, and Joe is here on this side too, and Joe Garso. Joe Garso, please send me your new email address. I keep bouncing. Okay, Leah, hi, Loretta, Lorraine, Margot, Martha, Martha Gallahue and Martha Mickelson, Michael and Nicholas, hi, and Nicole and Nicolaus and Risto, Sam, and looks like Patel. Yes, hi, Patel, Suzanne and Tia and Veronique and Victor and Walter. And over here on this side, Joe is helping me stay sane so I don't do something really foolish with the recording and all the rest of it. Well, okay, look, I've been sending you basically as I work along. I'd like to stay in touch with you. I could drop out for about 4 or 5 years and then get back to you on this. But I think the wiser thing to do is to just kind of go along and discuss these matters. And every 2 or 3 days or so, I've been sending you some upgrades on what I'm thinking. I also know some of you have written to me, and I apologize that I have not been able to write back yet, but you're on my list. I've got a little list, and I'm going to be getting back to you. Sometimes when I get in a flow, I just have to keep going, otherwise it'll stop. So I hope you will understand, because some of you have said some very wonderful things, and we just recently had a very nice little video. I think Asha sent that in. It was about oneness. It was a brief video, and it took more of the sentient approach, but it was very lovely, and the seamlessness of all of life. It's an important word, seamlessness, overcoming the great heresy of separateness. That was demonstrated in that beautiful little video, and others of you have written very wise things. So the same thing when you write to me, if you can stand it, write to the group at the same time, and that way at least they'll benefit from your thoughts, and you won't have to wait for me, because sometimes I'm a little tardy due to all of these issues. All right, well, now, I sent you a big document about the absolute and related subjects. Of course, no one can really talk about the absolute, but you have to die trying. So at least you have to say what it isn't, and then not this, not that. And in the process of saying what it isn't, that sense of what it might be begins in a tiny way with a tiny little shaft of light to dawn. And then I'm working now with you on infuception, and I'm working also, I have another one coming that I've been sending to you on infinity and related subjects. There's going to be a lot of, here it is. Yeah, I mean, our categories are going to be, these are just a few of them: space, time, being, self, identity. That's going to be a really big one. Consciousness, perception, mathematics, and how it fits. I hope you understand that I'm not a mathematician, but what I try to do is to think in that way and to show how mathematics is related to ontology. Ontology is the science of being. And when I think of mathematics, I don't think of quantities floating in the air that have no relevance to our immediate life. I think of being the mathematical operations. Change, division and motion, reality, God, deity, injunctions. I have a few simple things, and when I reorganize all this with the help of my little suicide squad here, it's going to be from the simplest to the most complex, I hope. The infinitesimal, fascinating study, and negligibility, which is related to the infinitesimal, the zero and the zero, the nothingness, which doesn't really exist, and the no thing, which does, infuception, which we're dealing with now, superimposition of all extension into a vanishing point, the point itself, and the time point and the space point. All of these are going to be subjects on which I have already written a lot over the last 7 years. It's just a question of organizing it. So maybe a little bit of that seventh ray will come into my being. Sequence and sequentiality and whether they really exist at all, and endless dimension and no dimensionality at all. Superdimensionality and no dimensionality, and linearity, does it exist? These are just a few things that I'm going to be dealing with, and other things will come up. And, I have been dealing with them already. I have a lot of seed thoughts and a lot. And I'll try to organize them in such a way that it's of value to you. But the most important thing is the age-old dictum from Brahmanism and Hinduism and the Vedanta: thou art that. Thou art that. And basically, it's been said that 10,000 books could be written and they'd all be on the same subject. They'd all come out of the same seed: thou art that. And we would then begin to identify with the one and only reality, or at least some reflection of it. And that's what infuception is all about. Okay, so before I get into just a few of these, oh boy, see, I've got quite a bit of stuff here, but I'm only going to deal with some of it really. And, just to get us thinking along these lines. Now, look, realistically, you're going to come up with your own language. This is my language. I'm heavily influenced by the third ray, and actually passing through says the Tibetan, through Earth, Mars, and Saturn are mostly third ray monads, okay? And somehow I got hit by this thing, maybe 30 years ago, and I recognize it as a continuation from Greek philosophy in the days of Zeno and Parmenides and the pre-Socratic philosophers, and I don't know, I just had to continue with it. So this is a third ray approach, largely a third ray approach. And I know that some of you just get it and you don't need this third ray approach. You have something else. It's okay. My wife is always telling that to me, that it says, well, yes, of course, of course. And I'm reasoning my way into some kind of realization. And she says, of course. Well, maybe that's the way it is for the second ray monads and others that are like that. And first ray monads wouldn't bother with all these words and so forth. But this is the way I think of applying a little bit of what I've learned about meticulous entirety to this subject. Now, it's so easy to make errors. You can make errors in thinking and, contradictions and all the rest of it. And all of that will emerge, oh, you contradicted yourself here and there, and maybe I did. Sometimes when I look at the absoluteness, I think of it as the great contradiction, and that everything within it cancels everything else out. But then again, I look at it also as the inarticulate or the unarticulated homogeneous wholeness. An articulation is a separation, it's a distinction. And I look at absoluteness as absolutely unarticulated, but what it seems to periodically, what flashes forth from it, articulation begins, but not in the absolute per se. So, where does it all come from? That's going to be a big, big question. And how does absolute infinity, and I mean absolute infinity, arise from homogeneity? From absolute homogeneity of the absolute arises absolute infinity, which is the self-image of the absolute deity, which is God in action, the absolute in action. Now, we're going to have to define our terms, and you may come up with terms that you like better, and that's okay. Just think about the subject. That's all I'm asking. And then maybe something in the heart will stir, because the heart stirs, and as a result, the perceptions can come. But before I begin to get into this, do you have any questions that you want to ask me right now before, based upon a couple of months' work here that we've done, or any questions before we get into a few of these statements or seed thoughts?
Jay has two questions. Isn't time unreal? And isn't everything happening all at once?
Well, that's time is only in the Mayavic world. Time is actual, but unreal in the deepest sense. When you get into the absolute homogeneity, it never changes forever, and time is all unreal. The minute you have division and movement, you have time. Even I said the minute or the moment. When you have, our language is just filled with these time references, but when you have division and movement, you have time, and in the Mayavic world, you do have illusory time proceeding as an actuality that we have to deal with cyclically forever, even while no time is passing whatsoever in the world of absoluteness. Now, that's the first bit, that's the first bit about time. And what was the second bit there, Joe? Are you there?
Isn't everything happening all at once?
Well, that's a very good question, and I'm going to try to deal with that. We know that we're used to extension in time and extension in space, and Kant basically said that these are categories of perception. So, we have to see what it really would mean to say there would be no extension in time and no extension in space if everything were happening all at once. Now, in a way, I have to say the answer is yes. In absolute infinitude, all possible interactions of a positive nature are occurring. When I say of a positive nature, I mean a nature that does not deny the reality of the absolute, and does not deny the reality of absolute infinity. When Spinoza dealt with these subjects, he has sort of 6 definitions in the beginning of his book on the ethics. He wrote not a lot, but the ethics was what he really paid attention to, just like Walt Whitman, with Leaves of Grass. That was it. He just kept on focusing there. So he's got 6 definitions, Spinoza does, of God, and these definitions deal with the negation of negativity. In other words, negativity is not allowed because it would cancel reality. So the question is about everything happening at once. Now we have to ask, what is a thing? Is a thing a state, a movement, an interaction? And then, of course, this depends on division. There has to be division for everything to happen all at once. Now, in the absoluteness, there is no time, and you can't even say that everything is happening all at once because there's just no divisions to have things whatsoever. Now, when it gets to a lower realm, which I'm calling the realm of absolute infinity, or the absolutely infinite, yes, we can say that all things past and future are absolutely inherent within absolute infinity, and they're all happening at the same time because, well, there is no time to waste in a way, because absolute infinity as an articulated whatever appears only cyclically. It is somehow flashed forth from the absolute as I see it, and then there's a return to the absolute. So there is a night of Brahma, in the secret doctrine that deals with this. You never know quite what levels she's dealing with, whether it's planetary or whether it has to do with, the universe or super universe. She's always changing her position, but there is a night. And, just like in our sleep, there's a night. And what happens during that night? In that night, we'd say the absolute is all in all, and whatever uttermost beyond any kind of description that it is, it prevails without any kind of illusory self-generated rival. It prevails as the absoluteness which we are forever as it is. Now, then we don't know how, but something arises, and all the worlds of cyclic illusion are flashed forth, and we have to participate in them. We who are extensions of the absolute and extensions of the absolute deity, we have to participate in them as if they mattered, because they do. It's our creative act, and it will be seen to be our creative joy once we get high enough in the universal process to remember what it is we have done. But this question about, is everything happening at once? If you really investigate that, you will see that happenings require time. So what you have to have is the superimposition of all units of time and the negation of all units of time for everything to happen at once. And I'm going to deal with that when I deal with the point, the true point, which I call the ultimate negligibility. I know these are, third-rate words and all that, but please forgive me. It just shrinks down to nothing or next to nothing and is absorbed back into absolutely homogeneous substance, the absolute itself. So there are real problems with that question you just asked, and I'm going to try to elucidate that somehow. Because when we think of things happening all at once, we think about extension in space. Well, is there extension in space? Really? Maybe not. Is there extension in time? Really? Well, maybe not. Are there things to happen? Well, maybe not. So, it's a big question, and I think that's as far as I can go with it.
We have 2 more questions and then a comment. I unmuted Francis. Francis, could you frame your question for Michael?
Sure. I'd just like to have you, if you would, please contrast perception, which is where infuception has its, right, I guess, English roots, as specifically as related to spirituality, not in general use. And infuception, I think in that contrast, we may get a better feel for where you're going.
If only I knew, Francis, where I'm going. Okay, perception necessitates the subject-object division and is incomplete identification. We'll kind of deal with that. Infuception is a contemplative state, maybe, just the way samadhi is a contemplative state in which subject and object merge and you identify with that which you see. Perception tends to divide one thing from another. Infuception identifies with a substratum which is universally present and is the source of all differentiation, which is then perceived. Now, in other words, when I say that the universal logos perceives itself and thus produces the emanated universe, it never loses track of the wholeness which it is and the wholeness in which every apparently different perception is participating as a unit. So the perception kind of draws a ring past night around things, and infuception identifies with the source of all things that are usually perceived. Of course, we don't want to get too cut and dried about it. We all perceive. We all perceive this from that. There are differentiations everywhere, whether it's in sound or sight or touch or whatever. But we don't all infusive because we don't identify as the substratum out of which all of these differentiations, these perceivables, have arisen. I wonder if that helps a little bit. In other words, perception is a limited form.
Follow-up question.
Limited form of infuception.
I'm sorry, say again.
I say that perception is a primitive or limited or a bounding form of infuception, which infuception has no form. Okay? That's important.
Is it, how would you delineate it from identification?
When you infusive, you identify.
Yeah, okay. Great.
I mean, it's as simple as that. And the heart center is really needed. Well, at least I discovered that for myself. Look, what works for me doesn't necessarily work for everybody. I experimented with the heart and the head and all that, and I find that this Buddhic resonance of the heart center just works for me. And I also find that there are certain trigger words. These trigger words are induce the awareness and of the infuceptional state, and they work for me. Now, everyone I think should find his or her own trigger words, and I think it's mantrams. In a way, it's third ray, but in another way, it's second ray, because the whole generation of mantrams comes along the second ray line. So put those two rays together, and you pretty well figure out what I'm trying to do here. Yeah. Anything else, Francis?
I made a comment, which is the term all at once is also a reference to time, not to timelessness.
Yes, it is. It is, and our language is bound by that. And we have this, simultaneity issue. How can many separate things happen with no space and no time? Even the word happen is a problem. So, look, in the New Age, we tend to say it's all happening at once. And in a way, it's true. But once you start collapsing time and space, we just find there's no room and no time for it all to happen. So what is it that's really happening? And is anything happening at all? nothing except in the illusory world of extension in time and space. So we are given in illusion the illusion of extension. And this illusion is what we play with. And DK says it, he says, time and space become the master's playthings. Now, he doesn't go any further, but you get the idea that they can have a good time manipulating this extension in time and space. But what happens when you eradicate the interval? I'm going to talk about the eradication of the interval, whether it's an interval between two instances of an action, or it's the interval of duration of a thing. When you start eradicating the interval, you superimpose all points. And when you superimpose all points, you've pretty well eliminated the space and time in which things can happen. And is it just to do that? And I say it is just because all things, all events, all times, all spaces have to be compared with absoluteness or with absolute infinity. When they, in other words, the ratio is always absolute infinity to 1. That's the highest ratio, and that ratio gives us the tiniest ever lessening that can exist without being nothing. You see, in other words, nothing doesn't really exist because all things are perceptions. So you can't perceive nothing. But no thing does exist, and those are the poles. So this question about time and space, are they real at all? Or are we just here in this Mahamayavic universe, and then after the universe, we're in kind of a super Mahamaya. Mahamaya means great illusion, everybody. Probably know that. It means great illusion. So after the universe is over, we're not done with illusion. The only way we're done with illusion is to return to absoluteness, only to discover that we, the absolute, have never left absoluteness. So there's a lot of conundrums that come into here, and only some kind of experience in the heart that unifies all things is going to open the door beyond words for to lift the veil into a new unified infuception. Hopefully, we'll get used to this language if you want to. Maybe some people will never want to get used to this language, and it'll all start to mean something. And now I'm going to use another word, imperiential. Instead of experiential, I'm calling it imperiential, imperience. It'll all be imperienceable, and it won't just be a bunch of words. Okay.
Let me ask Suzanne's question for her, and then let's open Tia's mic. Suzanne asks, can you share some of the trigger words that work for you?
Yeah, I'm working on them, Suzanne. Yeah, I've been working on one just lately, and this question is causing me to oh yeah, I almost forgot the whole thing. Otherness, sameness, otherness, sameness, homogeneity, which means completely identical substance, and the word substance. Right now I'm really working a lot with otherness, only to discover that otherness is sameness. Sameness is a really important one. What I've got here, actually effective injunctions, for me anyway, and you'll see irreducibility is another one, and the heart of sameness. That's important. Now, I'll give these to you. Even the hissing of a snake, like the Kundalini, as a prelude to the idea of sameness is a good one. And of course, DK's mantra, coming from God knows where, is maybe the main thing of it all. Naught is but me. That's a great second ray mantram. I still persist is the first ray, and the worker and the work are one. Third ray, and it's a marvelous 7 of them. And as a matter of fact, if I can direct you to that in his writings, it won't be a loss. It'll be a gain for you, and gain for me. I return all the time. I still persist. Okay, so let's see. Where's this? Let's see if I can find it. There it is. So it's in several places. Go to Esoteric Psychology, Volume 2, and read the 7 great mantrams. And of course, I work a lot with the second ray mantram. Let all the life be drawn to the center and enter thus into the heart of love divine. Then from that point of sentient life, let the soul realize the consciousness of God. Let the word go forth, reverberating through the silence, naught is but me. And then, every one of these, at the very end of the little explanation is the mantram itself. And they are fantastic. They are fantastic. Another thing that is the ancient Atlantean chant, which is really worth. Let's see if I can find that one. Yeah, here it is. So go to Discipleship Volume 1 and go to page 678. And sometime I've given an explanation of this verbally on Makara, and it's fantastic. Again, it's just out of this world meaningful. And you can just kind of see what the final thing is. Swept am I by the universal life, and as I sweep upon my onward way, the way of God, I see all lesser energies die out. I am the one, I God. I am the form in which all forms are merged. I am the soul in which all souls are fused. I am the life, and in that life all little lives remain. That really says it. So that's page 678 of Dyna 1, and then also go to Dyna 2, page 284 or 283. Let's just check it. We'll just check it. Because there is the seed of all philosophy found right there. And let's see if I got it. Here it is, page 284. And these 6 points will tell the whole story and how nothing ever changes and yet seems to change. Being cries forth and says, untranslatable, death crumbles all, existence disappears, yet all for A remains, untouched, immutably the same, God is. And by that God we mean the great homogeneous being which all of us are. So those 3 things are kind of my reference points. This great mantram from Dyna 2, 284, and then 678 in Dyna 1, and whatever it is I showed you at first. I forget what it was, but...
Suzanne had an observation. She said that it was interesting to her that the use of the S, the letter S, and the sound S over and over, and the numerical value of that is the number 1, and she just keeps hearing that as you were speaking. Tia had a really good request that I'm going to offer for her because she doesn't want to unmute her mic.
Okay.
She said, as a visual, can you refer to the original chart that you began with today and show us where this discussion is taking place, or is this discussion off the chart entirely?
In a way, it's off the chart because this is all of the 7 cosmic planes, of which our highest spirituality is simply found on the lowest of them. Every one of them would be broken out with 49 levels and actually 343 levels. If we were to look at the divisions that are there, every one of these would be as complicated as the bottom one. And such beings as our planetary logos and our solar logos, and beings beyond that, cosmic logo and all that, they have their expression here on this great compendium of cosmic planes. But from another perspective, keep rising, this compendium is only the etheric physical plane of some kind of supercosmic planes. And then we go to the supercosmic planes, and it turns out to be only the etheric physical plane of super, and on we go until we reach what's called, DK calls it the 10 dimensions of cosmos. It is kind of a master number, but you can learn plenty here because, frankly, our greatest exemplars, the Christ and the Buddha, are still on this lowest plane. And everything that we can think of as spirituality is focused on this plane. So we have a long time before we can break free and travel as a monad to one of the constellations where we will learn to be, different kinds of roles and in larger capacity in the future. As far as what we're talking about right now, we're somewhere here. We're using the abstract mind to a degree. I'd like to differentiate, Tia, because it's possible to get really complex with a concrete mind and think it's the abstract mind. You know what I mean? So we're dealing with just a forest of concretions, and it looks really complicated. We say, oh, well, that's the abstract mind. No, that's not. The abstract mind is something that we begin to see as we progress with the building of the Antikarana, and basically it's the great outlines of thought which man has entertained and which he will entertain in the future, and give something of the blueprint of how things are put together. The Buddhic plane is something different because it's got love, wisdom, and pure reason and immediate intuition. So we're kind of dealing with these two levels right here. And if I were to go backwards, here you see the Buddhic plane, and here is the Atmic plane, and here is the plane of abstract mind. Most of what we're doing here is abstract mind, but if it just stayed there and it did not develop further, then it would not be a success. It has to have the immediate impression of intuition that comes from Buddhi, and that's this one. And supposedly, when you see and identify as all this, then your spiritual will up here will be strengthened, and then eventually, you will become, as you really are already, but have forgotten it, the monad in expression, and that has to do here. And there are three temples. The temple in the wilderness is, tabernacle in the wilderness is down here for the personality. The temple of Solomon is here with the egoic lotus, and the temple of Ezekiel is here on the monadic plane, and all those temples get destroyed, and you're liberated into the highest plane called the Sea of Fire, and that's just the beginning. This Sea of Fire is the liberated monad, and I don't know what vehicle it has, if it has any vehicle whatsoever. But that's the being that makes the trip on the way to the Pleiades. Eventually, everything will end for us in the Pleiades, and, this is kind of how you see it. It all ends in that little green triangle, but of course that's just the beginning of something else. So look, there's plenty to keep us interested, and what I'm talking about here, I'm trying to talk using the normal mind, making a bridge to the abstract mind. Hopefully,
you have a
yeah. hopefully,
comment from Ishtar.
yes, okay, wait a second, as soon as I'm finished. And then hopefully this combination of concrete and abstract that we call building the antichrona will lead to direct perception, or what Master Moria calls straight knowledge. That's where we can get here. But now look, this is so high that it's beyond the masters. In other words, the higher two subplanes of the Buddhic level and the atmic level represent states of awareness and capability that are beyond the fifth degree. So they're probably Chohanic, relating to what monads can handle and what monads of the seventh degree can handle. We got plenty to keep us busy right in this area. Okay, now what was Ishtar's point?
Well, first I want to say Tia says it helps to know where we are and where we want to be vibrating. And she says, excellent.
Yeah.
And then Ishtar says to add, in the law of one, it says that we are all part of the infinite creator's thought. So is an analogy that the thought is like on a CD in a certain age, and you put it into a CD player and you press play, all exists except the forward play is actually separation. When you do play it forward, it is a separative act. That's her observation.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm not exactly sure. See, the point is the creator. We are the creator. See, that's exactly what we have to understand. Of course, they put you through all kinds of things if you say, I am God, but there's only one being in all of cosmos. So when we talk about the creator, there are many, many creators on the way up. Let's see, like here's an example. And this is called Parabrahm, and every one of these is a higher and higher creator, and this is just the beginning, okay? So we are the absolute deity in extension, and we also never left home, so we are the absolute deity where the absolute deity is. We are also the absolute, which is the only thing that is, and the absolute is forever exactly what it is. So what we have to do is separate the I, the this and that. This is never separated from that, and we are apparently a little this, and we are ultimately only that, thou art that. So our language inclines us to say, I am this. See what I mean? And it automatically kind of separates subject from the object. But we're going to learn a method of feeling or infuception or something where subject and object are always merged, and there is no thing whatsoever that we are not. And now, one of the things I want to say, and I'll be saying it again, is when you're dealing with infuception and you're dealing with the perception of the substratum, forget about quality. When the soul is the quality of life, and when we study with decay, the whole thing is about quality. We're studying all the qualities and their interactions. When you're in the when you're in the curriculum of being, you're only interested in isness. Quality is not the issue. You can study that someplace else. If I'm looking at the most repulsive thing and the most beautiful, the isness is what I want. The isness is that realm where they are identical because they both are. So I don't get into this is repulsive, this is against the plan, this is the Black Lodge, and this is beautiful, and this is promoting the plan. I don't get into that. I just say, it is. Okay, now how is isness generated? Through self-perception. The great deities self-perceive, and as a result, they produce differentiation, but it's not really differentiated at all. It's just time and space are our playthings, and the differentiation is for the sake of our game, our dance, our drama, whatever you want to call it. There's many, many reasons. Why did all this come to be? Nobody can answer it, but there are many hypotheticals involved in that. The absolute has nothing to gain by producing universes. And everything that ever was, is, or could be is somehow inherent in absolute infinitude, which is what I call the absolute deity's reflection of itself. It contains absolute infinitude, absolute infinity. Nothing is to be gained. It is a purely avataric gesture. When DK defines an avatar, he says that which descends from a higher level with no motive for its own self-aggrandizement or improvement, only out of benefit to that which is lower. So it's an avataric creative motive. The whole thing is joy. The whole thing is bliss. We have to awaken to that through going through privation. Now, in other words, privation. Well, is there privation? Well, I'll just give a little mantra that which is absolutely infinite could not be absolutely infinite unless it was also absolutely finite. So, in other words, finitude has to be included within absolute infinity, which is the reason, but that's a more philosophic reason for the creation of our universes. Other people who are more artistically inclined or whatever, they'll call it the great drama, the great creation, whatever, and they'll be right too. And everyone will be right according to his or her ray line. So I'm not sure about the particular book or teaching that you're citing. I'm just giving it to you from my perspective. And we'll all have our own perspectives here, for sure. Okay, what else, Joe?
A thank you from Ishtar. She says she totally agrees. It was just a limited analogy to try to view separation. And then Joe has a comment. Time and no time, negative and positive poles of electricity, breathe in, breathe out, heartbeat, and the pause between.
Well, I think all of those are very, suggestive ideas. And time is so enigmatical, In other words, there's a certain amount of time in which no time exists, and you immediately see, oh my goodness, what are we talking about? The timeless state of the no thing occurs apparently from a certain perspective in time and has a duration. So time and no time are certainly alternating, and the whole thing, is electrical in its demonstration, and that is probably the most explanatory of the ways that we can view this, but maybe we're not quite ready to view what Fohat really is. The great breath breathes in and out, and the heartbeat is, in a way, the reflection of that. Now, there is no time. Look, where there is no division, there is no isolation of units. Where there is no particularity of units, there's no interaction. Where there's no interaction, there's no time. So the great homogeneity is utterly timeless, and even when we speak of duration, it's problematic. So we've got timelessness and illusory time running, and now I'm going to use the time word simultaneously. It's gonna challenge the mind. Okay, that's okay. Challenge the mind and help it break into a degree of abstraction, which we may not have experienced up to this point, and will lead into something we call straight knowledge, which will be the intuition and will really bring us into the Buddhic plane. So thanks for those suggestive words. What else, Joe? I mean, Jojo. Okay.
The staff, Joe. There's a kind of quizzical, kind of funny question. This and that, is and at. Who is I, and where am I at?
Where am I at? Well, first of all, who can answer that? But, in a way, who is I? What is I? And as we think we are, we don't exist. And if you, not really. And if you went back to the previous universe, you couldn't find anything that you would call yourself other than the wholeness of the identity behind that universe. And thus it would go and go and go. There's no particularity, no lasting particularity in identity. No enduring, lasting particularity, particleness in real identity. So, you look at yourself and you think you're evolving and one day I'll be this and that and all the rest of it. And all we can do is evolve towards the absolute infinitesimal, which our universal logos is, in comparison with absolute infinity and in comparison, however you can compare it, with absoluteness. You can't find yourself in previous universes unless you're willing to be the wholeness of things. So it's kind of fun, this, that, and all the okay, this and that. You know how it is. Am I this or am I that? Thou art that. Well, what about this? Is this that? You could have a lot of word games with all of that. Is and at, who is I, and where am I at? Well, you're nowhere. You're nowhere at all. The where doesn't exist except in the Mayavic worlds of relativity. You need division for there to be a where, and there's no division. So there's you're not anywhere. Sorry to say, or just happy to say it. Okay, Suzanne, a little fun poem. All right. Anything else?
So another way of saying this is that all relative instantiations are happening at once.
Well, you need in a way that is true. The extension in time and the extension in space has to be part of an illusory Mayavic presentation to the limited consciousness. The limited, there's only one consciousness that's truly unlimited, and that is the consciousness of the absolute deity perceiving itself. Why don't I say the absolute? I'm working on this, okay? Because the absolute has no consciousness. The absolute has no nothing except the uttermost, absolutely infinite intensification of what it is. It doesn't need consciousness. It doesn't need any partial means of perception. All of that is based upon division. There is no division. So we're not going to accuse the absolute of being possessed of all of those kinds of higher types of movement and perception that we find in lower worlds. But the absolute deity, now this is a different thing, at least in my mind, which has been flashed forth periodically into the supra-universal worlds, that has consciousness. And on the basis of that infinite, absolutely infinite consciousness, it chooses something to instantiate in finitude, in the state of finitude in the next universe. So again, time enters. The only truly timeless state is absoluteness itself, in which there's no division, no particularization, no movement, no nothing, the no thing, which is the absolute essence of all things. But, we won't look at it. Anybody that tells you, oh, look, I had an experience of the absolute, just forget it, okay? Because it just isn't true. Even an experience of a planetary logos would fry our circuits. We're not, so we're not talking about that which renders even our universe into an infinitesimal. We're not talking about that. But okay, look, you never know where this is going to lead. You never know what infuception will arise. It's just very important to be everything. See, in the last analysis, when all the reasoning is done and all of the twisting and the turning and the trying to understand the articulations of absolute infinitude, which we can't do, it's got to be I am you, you are I, naught is but me. It all comes right down to naught is but me, and that has to be practiced. That has to be practiced. Now, I practice it. Sometimes I'm very disappointed with myself, my relative self. I don't get into it. Sometimes, bang, there it is. Lately, this term, the otherness, which is sameness, has opened the door for me. But then sometimes it doesn't. It's going to take relatively Earth years to walk around like the Buddha in the state of suchness. And the Christ too, the great statement, what is it, John 17, about identification, that DK says is the greatest sort of written statement about identification that has yet been produced. Between the Buddha's suchness and Christ's identification, we have plenty to keep us busy. Now, we live busy lives. We are serving in the relative world. We have to figure this whole thing out scientifically, and we have to see how everything, all these illusory bits and pieces work together. But behind it all is complete substance, complete changelessness, the utterness, the unchanging utterness. Words are not sufficient, but maybe some words will be of such a nature that they will invoke or evoke a certain perception, infuception, which will take us in our limited state where we haven't been before. And that's the goal. Thou art that. Naught is but me. When you look at anybody, anything, it has to be as much you as you are you in your normal mode of thinking. And it's a question of identification. And that's what we're on our way to, which, as I always say, does not excuse us from learning the entire science of occultism in all of its bits and pieces so we can be effective in the Mahamaya. I hope that's not nonsense. Maybe it is nonsense. I don't know. But, I hope it means something to us. Never were we born, never will we die. Never will we change in our utterness. And the rest is a good time. Or a good non-time. The rest is just one creation after another. And you don't create it, you become it, while still remaining what you've always been. So, it's like the monad. The monad stays at home, and at the same time it goes forth. So it's the same way. We are what we are, and we apparently go forth into deep ignorance and have a really good drama of it. And it doesn't add a thing to absolute infinity. The possibility or the instantiation within absolute infinity already exists. But the one thing we can do is become more ignorant, and that's a gift. So we come forth in ignorance, and we work our way through, and that possibility is already worked out within absolute infinity, but we enjoy the trip only to discover that everything we've done, it's not that it's been predestined, but that possibility has existed within absolute infinity. Whatever way we choose in our ignorance has been pre-cogitated in absolute infinity. Obviously I'm going to have difficulty with words, but when I'm writing, I try to be more careful, you know. And the main thing is you work on it until you become everything else, everybody else, the stars, the planets, the people, the worms, the water, the elements. You work on it until you wake up in the morning and there's nothing you perceive that you are not. Nothing can, I like to say, nothing can escape your being it. It's not good English, but nothing can escape your being of it. It's there is no other. And that's why I meditate upon the otherness, which is sameness. I realize I have to kind of invent a language here. A lot of mystics and other philosophers and all that kind of thing, maybe they haven't had to invent a language. I have to invent a language because it's my open sesame. It's my key to the door. You'll develop your own key to the door, and that's a door that has to be gone through on the way to the monad, and you're already there. You know, you'll discover that whoever comes forth to meet you is you. So a lot of paradoxes begin to occur. Is there anything else?
We have a couple of affirmative comments. And then, Stephen, would you raise your hand if you want to frame these questions you have for Michael? The comments are from Ishtar, beautifully said, thank you. And the second one from Jay, understand what you mean. Yes, the rest is a good experience. And Stephen's hand is not up, so I will read his questions. He says, assuming avataric motive, assuming nothing is to be gained, why create universes at all? What is the purpose?
Well, that's the ultimate question of all questions, but it's why become universes at all? And like I said, it's so that you can continue to be what you are. And in other words, the absolutely infinite, in order to remain absolutely infinite, must finitize itself, because in the absolutely infinite, finitization must be included, and you're not going to find it except in what I call the ontological extrusion. Okay, that means the going forth of beingness into isolation of a universe, which is, you know, finitudization or finitization, let's put it that way. That's a question we cannot answer, except I can only think that there is a great, somehow, I mean, that's an unanswerable question, Stephen, but maybe some kind of bliss, some kind of joy, some kind of the joy of ignorance, of relief from knowing everything. In other words, the journey into finite ignorance is also part of the infinite journey. And there must be some value in it, but no addition whatsoever. So it cannot be for the sake of acquisition, because the absolute is not getting smarter and smarter and more capable. It is absolute. And absolute infinity is absolute. There's not any kind of interaction, and it's just, mind-boggling, that is not contained within it. But the journey into ignorance or into isolation of oneness rather than allness is something that is necessary. Now, Blavatsky uses the word necessity. Sometimes she uses the word necessity in a way that it seems to compel even absoluteness. According to necessity, this might happen. Well, that's a law, but the great being is above the law. The great being is the law, so we who can't even understand how to take the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh initiation, whatever, are we going to answer that question? I don't think so. But I think that the joy of simply being the other forever, like everybody's familiar. There's nothing you haven't seen forever. There's no form that's not utterly familiar to you. There's no person that you don't know forever. in essence. You know, dealing with this disguised familiar is a great creative act, and somehow this artistic thing, I could almost call it an artistic thing, writing our own story, as it were, it seems to be a necessity in order to maintain the absolute infinitude of the absolute deity. And now remember, I do differentiate between absoluteness, which is not articulated, has no parts and pieces whatsoever, and is only the maximal otherness. What can I say? Maximal otherness. Once it flashes forth into the absolute deity can act. And the only way it acts is acts upon itself. And what is itself? Itself is absolute infinitude in all of its absolutely infinite possibility. And the only really free choice in town is the choice of the next universe, which is not, in my view, connected karmically to any preceding universe whatsoever. If there were the slightest bit of improvement, or between universes, then every universe would be infinitely evolved, it doesn't stand to reason. So anyway, that question, I say, cannot be answered, but I've offered a few ideas about why become universes. And when we talk about the realm of purpose for what? You're going to improve? No, you're not going to improve. It's not about improvement. It's about the it's about the experience in ignorance, which is an experience in privation and a relief from knowing everything. It's just a turnaround. I'm working on it, and you'll work on it. We'll all work on it, and until we're solo logos, when we decide we can't solve it, and on and on and on, this may be an insoluble question in universe. Post-universe, the supra-universal world, let's see what is solvable and not. Okay. All right. That's it.
The next one is from Ishtar. Do you think the improvement is only about the material, illusory creations?
I think absolute reality cannot be improved. Not at all. It is the uttermost. No improvement possible. It is forever the mostest. The utterly utter. No improvement there. But in the illusory world, there are stages of completion of the archetype, which is the foundation of that illusory world. And there comes constant illusory improvement until the archetypal fulfillment is reached. And then the reabsorption is absolute infinity, where every single track that was taken already exists, but not necessarily the destiny of the one who chooses in ignorance. There's something to work out there, Otherwise, we might get into the work of John Calvin, which would not be very nice, with everything absolutely predetermined. But in a way, there's only one will in all of cosmos, and it's our will. And we can't say there's a higher will. There's just us in identification as a higher being willing. But we have deliberately rendered ourselves into privation and ignorance for whatever reason. So the only game in town is really to become less than you forever are. You can't become more than you forever are. I know everything's upside down, but those are the conclusions I've been led to. I'm not sure I answered your question, Ishtar.
Francis has a comment. He says, improvement is qualitative and is thus transcended in beingness.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. And of course, look, we have to play the game because we became the game. And we descended into ignorance even while we did not descend into ignorance. So there's part of us here that has to play the qualitative game until we reach that qualitative archetype, which is the origin of the theme of the universe we have become. Now, you know, how can we talk about all this without inflation? And let's just say that any psychic inflation that you can even dream of applying to yourself is absolutely infinitesimally dwarfed by what you really are and what everybody really is. So there's no such thing as being better than anyone else, really. In the relative world, there is such a thing as hierarchical qualitative status. But in the world of being, the true world of being, there is no such status. We're all identical. And let's just say that the word identicality is a really important one, and we have to learn how to view the world of difference and the world of identicality simultaneously. And when we can do that, we have accomplished the curriculum of being and the curriculum of relativity simultaneously. And of course, why is it two curricula rather than one? You know, obviously, Kant was one of those philosophers who really realized the limitations of the human mind. Maybe I don't think I can realize it as he realized it by any means, but let's just say, with this apparatus that we have, we are limited in what we can suppose of the nature of reality. Now, I'm going so far as to say that there's not a being in cosmos which will not find itself so severely limited in apprehending what is the nature of absolute infinity that it just has to go over the line through dissolving or whatever happens there in the ultimate pralaya in order to even know what's really going on. So there's great things that can happen as you ascend and become more and better qualitatively, but it's not the same thing as the reality which lies above and beyond any instantiation of a universe. You know, so by the time I finish talking, I always ask, did I answer your question? Because I just, I forget. Okay.
We have a comment from Francis Wilkinson. When once contemplating the meaning of one, what came to me was Om, nothing, everything, an absolute trinity.
Okay. Look, if that works for you, I can see the point. I can also see the point that how it would lead into such an inclusive state that no thing and everything would be constructively related. I think, Francis, we have to be careful about nothing with little letters, which I don't think exists, period, and the no thing. In other words, I'm going to try to deal with this idea like Spinoza did, like with the necessity for positivity. He says the absolutely infinite God admits of no negation. Now, one has to really think about that. Spinoza is so wonderful. DK said he was member of the hierarchy, or, that he had the hierarchical vibration. And, kind of what I want to do is, if I could only find it, I'd just like to show you, because it's come up a few times, and what you just said brought it up. and I just want to see whether anything, or whether I'd have to go on such a search as not to be able to do anything. But it's in the beginning of his book on the ethics, and his life was very interesting. He was excommunicated from the Hebrew faith. Naturally, he was thinking way beyond the fence, and nobody could understand what he was talking about. And so what do you do with a person like that? Well, you get rid of him, But then he did have friends, thank goodness, and they supported his work. He lived as a lens grinder, I think. Gosh. I may not be able to find this, and yet I know it's here. I know it is here. Let's just see if I can, because it's so good. But I'm not going to really. No, I'm just getting a bunch of stuff. So it's not going to happen right now, not given the time that we really have. I'm going to do one attempt, and then while we talk about other things. Oh, can't spell. And notice how practical he was. Now, I think Spinoza was I think he was a Sagittarius with Saturn in Gemini, and maybe Gemini rising. He certainly had that lung affliction, and he was a lens grinder, which is so interesting because, a lot of Sagittarian people, they work with their eyes. I have a very good friend. He's heavily fifth ray and third ray, and he works always in optics. He's a Sagittarian, and they want to see better. So here he is trying to grind these lenses to perfection. And he brought it all the way down from his definition of the absolutely infinite God into how you treat each other, the ethics, so to speak. So I'll tell you what, Francis, send me your email. Probably I should have it here. Probably I should have it. I probably will. And I will send you the book, The Ethics, electronically. It's not a really big thing, and wow. Look at that, will you? Am I going to hit pay dirt? All right. So this is the beginning and his definitions, and his definition of God, number 6. By God, I mean a being absolutely infinite, that is a substance consisting in infinite attributes, of which each expresses eternal and infinite essentiality. Now there's a real philosopher at work. And I have at home a book called the Spinoza Dictionary. And do you know who wrote the who wrote the foreword to that dictionary? It was Albert Einstein. So we're getting into that third ray realm, and here it's going to say something about admitting of no negativity. Maybe it's in the axioms and so forth, but it's profound, just profound. And I can send you this book, and I have some commentary on it, but then it just got to be too much for me, so I just temporarily let up from it. Anyway, The Ethics by Spinoza and its definitions and all the rest of it. I'll be happy to send that to you. All right. Now, you know what? A lot of time has passed. Are there any other questions or comments, Joe?
Yes.
Here's Walt.
Well, Francis says,
Yeah.
to send him the digital file too, Francis Donald. But maybe you should send that out to all of us on the
Yeah, I've been
Yahoo group.
trying desperately to, I've been trying desperately to put in what you call one of those handouts, but I'm failing every time. And I don't
All
know.
right. Well, we'll figure that out.
I'll send it to you, and
I'm
you make
gonna.
sure everybody gets it, okay? Is that okay?
Yeah, we have something from Walter, and I've unmuted him. So Walter, unmute yourself and let's go.
Okay, Walter, go proceed.
Oh, yes. Yes, this is about considering multiple universes or the periodic manifestations of that. And I was thinking that multiple universes seems like a abstract concept because in order for manifested universes to exist in sequence, one after another, then that means there must be some sort of mysterious time must exist between these universes and encompasses them all. And that implies that the separate universes are still connected to each other and therefore could be considered actually one universe. And which, in other words, that if time doesn't exist in this ultimate state of being, then that means the separate manifest universes can't really be ordered or even compared to each other.
Okay, well, that's, that is an interesting point needing some real differentiation. I'm always one of these people with the many and the one that thinks that if we have the appearance of simultaneous multiplicity, we have a point of view toward the many, which will make of them one. So, a lot of people, when they talk about multiple universes, they talk about happenings on different dimensions of our present cosmos, and they call those happenings universes. In fact, in the old days, DK called the solar system a universe. And then it began to be that galaxies would be called a universe. But I keep on thinking that there is a night of time, and that the secret doctrine gives it to us, and there is a no universe state, whether multiple or single. I also think that all multiplicity can be viewed from a perspective where that view renders them into one. So I never leave with the idea of multiplicity as being final at any one instantiation of the absolute infinity. I believe it to be one finite thing, however many definite expressions, simultaneous expressions there might be. So some people go for this steady state theory and they say, well, okay, there is no Big Bang and basically there is no breathing and it's all a steady state universe coming and going, but they're not really accounting for where it comes from. So my answer to your question is that the many are the one, and there is a point of view from which, however definite a many there may be, they are seen as one. And if we start talking about infinite universes, then we've done something to time in the secret doctrine, etc., and according to the Great Breath, which I think is not admissible. But I think, it would take you and I about a couple of hours to really hash this through. So the many universes for me are always and only one universe, no matter how complex and how variable and multifaceted that one may be. And I preserve the illusion of time via the Great Breath and find that the ending of time only occurs in one state, which is the state of absoluteness, which is ongoing. So the no-time state occurs, as it were, in the presence of the Mahamayavic time state. And I know that is a bit of a paradox, but I think it can be worked out. So do you understand what I've said? Do I understand what I've said? Do I understand you? Do you understand me? Let's look into it.
We are increasing our understanding.
Okay, okay, Walter. I mean, because you know what I tend to do, most of my work is based upon comparing any definite, I take an adjective and make it into a noun, comparing any definite of whatever scope to absolute infinitude. And I always end up with what I call the absolute infinitesimal, which is next to nothing, but never nothing. It is the no thing, but it's never nothing. And it doesn't make any difference what kind of definite you give me. You can give me a definite that, is as large as you can conceive, as long as it's a definite, as long as it's a delineated something, as long as it's finite, no matter how big it is. Compare it with absolute infinitude, and you have the absolute infinitesimal. I've worked out a few symbols for that, and I'm going to, actually it's called, I'll show you, I don't know if I can show you the symbol, but the absolute infinitude looks something like this. If I can, I don't know, I'm not even sure I can do this, but I take a bar for absolute quantity. Whoop, that looks like a, all right, let me go over here just for fun. 1, A, 1, and then an A. Why doesn't this work? Oh, I'm messing around. Okay. And then the word ABS epsilon. ABS epsilon. And now, okay, it's not going to work here, unfortunately. But anyway, that gives me alpha epsilon and the other bar, and that's what I mean by the absolute absolute infinitesimal. That's how I draw the line, and I might be able to find it here, somehow, but I don't want to lead us off the track. Matter of fact, I'm not even going to be able to really get into this because too much time, I think, has been taken, but good time. Anyway, bar A epsilon bar, and that would be for the absolute infinitesimal. And I'm just really amazed that it's not working. I tend to get very stubborn when it comes to this stuff. So alpha and ABS epsilon. Aha, that's it. There's my symbol for absolute infinitesimal. And there's another symbol for absolute infinitude. And it gets very interesting. A lot of mathematicians say, well, look, this is indeterminate. You can't really know what it is. It's unspecified and all that. But if we think metaphysically and in terms of identity, we might get a different handle on it, and it could be quite interesting. Now, remember, friends, that no matter how complicated this all seems, it all boils down to thou art that, and naught is but me, and the feeling in the heart of being everything forever. That's what it boils down to. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that. Even when I'm writing, I have to remind myself of that, because otherwise I would just get lost in the forest. So eventually we're going to be good esotericists. We're going to know what the Tibetan knows and beyond, greater things shall you do than I do. It's always true. And we're going to identify infuceptionally the universal oneness in the face of all universal variety. And let's just keep it in the universe for the moment and not go into the great night, which is a different thing altogether. Okay. Anything else?
I think it's a good closing comment that came from Veronique. She says we should wake up from the state of finite you.
Finite you, yeah, that's right. That's absolutely, realize that we are the absolute infinite you, which of course, I, thou, I and you, we're going to find out it's only one thing, and that whatever we call you is I, and all that. But look, there's a danger. We use the words and we don't have the experience or the inperience. And what we're after in this group is to somehow get the inperience of it all, so that we don't get left with a lot of clanging words, like St. Paul said, the sounding of the brass. It's a lot of brass and no real substance. A state of no question, no explanation, not explainable, not understandable, but somehow beable, if I can say. It is nothing that we know or nothing we can learn about. Well, let's just say that our present state of ignorance can be lifted, and we will discover that we've always been it and known about it. It is a state of ultimate beingness, and that's true. And yes, it is very much limiting what it is. Yeah, I mean, any words will do that. But look, we have to use what we've got. Much more can be said, but no words will be good enough. And yet we have, we have the mind, we have the different capacities, and we can get closer and closer to the state when we know we just don't know. So I'm thinking about, the solar logos is scratching its head and saying, gosh, if only I knew what absolute infinitude was. But we'll discuss about that, whether the, every definite thing is an absolute infinitesimal, and can an absolute infinitesimal ever encompass what is absolute infinitude? Maybe it can encompass the inner beingness, or just get on the line of beingness and forget about all the content, because there's no way that you're going to include the content of absolute infinitude in the absolute infinitesimal. But in terms of their being identical, that's another interesting thing, that absolute infinitude and absolute infinitesimal are utterly identical in terms of essence. So, okay, thank you, Veronique. And, okay, is that it? Well, I'll tell you what, friends, look, I think, everything that I had. Oh, here's Nicholas. Nicholas, go ahead. Are you there? Oh, we got you, Nicholas.
Yeah.
Yes, you can speak. You wanted to speak. You go ahead.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Good.
I had a harsh argument with a very strong five-ray intellect. And the question was consciousness. And according to the perspective of that intellect, consciousness is something that appeared with some mechanic way, within the frame of what is perceivable in the universe.
Yep.
And then the question was that, if we perceive the universe as a wheel, in the sense that the Eastern approach is considering the wheels, and if we consider it as a huge wheel, as an absolutely infinite wheel, that, according to the modern approach, it is something that popped up through a Big Bang and is expanding, and then perhaps is going to return back, and so. The question there is that consciousness appeared in this development, in this cycle, and started making a new wheel, a wheel within, well, within makes no sense, but started making a new wheel. And according to our knowledge, there is a point where the evolving consciousness is involved in what we sense by the term white magic work or creation. That implies that a new will is made within something we cannot describe, we cannot speak, but it is a foundation upon or where consciousness is making a new universe. A new universe within the first universe, the first infinite universe, and that is expanding. If we expand our notion about time and we make it back to the infinite past and project it to the infinite future, we can consider that something is, let's say, growing within something that is based, a base for that growing. And that is giving new forms which were not existing before. For instance, a very good example of this is civilization. Civilization is a new creation within the frame of what Mother Earth is providing, and it is absolutely a new universe within the context of the globe. But if we are not very humble, we can imagine that this procedure started somewhere billions of years ago and it's going to project it in the future for billions of years. That implies what will be humanity after 3 billion of years. Now, after 5-6 years of written history in our experience, we are outside of the ring pass of the Earth. We are setting satellites, we are preparing an invasion in Mars, and so on. That implies that maybe 1 million years after now, humanity would be someplace outside, really outside. And that could be that possibly has happened in the past too. That implies also that it is a new will within a former will, which is tending to expansion within that. So there is a different expansion in terms of consciousness than the expansion of the Big Bang. Yes. It is an expansion that is consciously formulating things within the context of what is existing.
Yes, but yes, exactly, Nikolaos. Of course, we have to deal with this issue of in-universe happenings and expansions within this self-perception that we can call the universe and the night of time, according to the Great Breath. So if you give the night of time its fair place, there will be a time when none of this is occurring. And that according to the theory, that goes on forever. So I can see your speculations here as valid within the context of any given universe. I also am the kind that believes there is a periodical disappearance of any universe going on forever, and I think that gives us a still, broader perspective, possibly, that annihilates all of these things. In other words, I don't think we have to retain a universe in order to have a new one, is what I'm saying. But anyway, it looks like you and I, we have to, I can see another hour or two on this one as well. So, we have to have a chance to do that. And maybe right now we're at the very end, so we can't go into it too much in detail. Do you have any closing remark?
Well, this is implying that we can possibly expect that there is, let's say, an enlargement with of the consciousness universe. It's not exactly universe; it is an infinitude, and we possibly can consider about a third one, as in the context or analogy of the three solar systems, and we can perceive that possibly a next Big Bang, if it ever existed one, would be qualified by what happens to the universe which is the universe of consciousness.
Yeah, yes, you see, I believe that all of this is correct, and I think that we are in what I would call the intra-universal perspective when we talk about it. And I don't for a minute, and that's another issue, think that what we call the Big Bang is the creator of all things. I think there are as many Big Bangs as there are significant planes in the 10-dimensional universe, and that's another matter as well. So in my view, the Big Bang is simply the creator of an etheric physical system and nothing more. So, you know, now we have to extend that idea as well. So maybe you and I should get on the phone, Skype or something, and try to take it further, because this is another big one that requires that kind of investigation. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. You know, it's very hard to think of a situation in which no universe exists, but the secret doctrine, it jumps all over the place, of course, but it basically talks about the eternal parent sleeping. And we don't know whether the eternal parent is the solar logos or our galactic logos or the logos of the entire universe, or, you know, or whether it is something supra-universal altogether. So Blavatsky blinded a lot of things, but immediately we have this issue of cyclicity of the great breath, and we have to look at the time. This was not, that was not. Francis is doing a lot of study and presentation on the secret doctrine here, and the beginning of the secret doctrine is just radical when it comes to these matters. There's so many was-nots that you really realize you are dealing with the annihilation of everything we can call universal, but not necessarily the annihilation of the eternal parent. And then we have to decide what that is. So thank you for your thoughts on that. And I think, Nick, that we can, look at what's going on in universe and supra-universally. And I think our speculation can extend to that. Okay. All right, friends. Well, look, I'll tell you what I see.
Just so we don't forget, we have Walter and Francis with their hands up.
Oh, okay. What is that? All righty. Goodness, this could go on a long time. Obviously, I'm having to change my approach here, don't I? Okay, so Francis, muted by an organizer, and now I unmute you, and there you are.
Yes, a quick comment about pralaya, which is that every cycle has a pralaya, even root races between races, but that doesn't mean that everything else stops. But there is something, when I mean everything else, I mean, for instance, a root race on Earth might have a pralaya, but the process on Saturn continues or whatever.
Yeah.
But and that there is something of that pralaya that has an identicality to all other pralayas. It's an, for lack of a better term, an energetic to pralayaness that extends through all pralayas. And which is one reason I think the term can be used to describe, the infinitesimal of a solar pralaya compared to a maha pralaya, which is something altogether other. And I think you've been speaking of it, where instead of the life force being held in situ to reassume its process in the next manvantara, that it is, I think DK Theosophy says it the best with the day be with us, where there is a homogeneity and beyond, because even that doesn't describe the state, which, we've talked about with the absolute, and that is that final pralaya. Okay,
Yes, I think
that was one comment.
the final, I think everything the same until it isn't. And, and I go further, I'll say no karmic connection between appearing universes.
Yeah, and I think there's a logical, that comment has a logic to it, because as you said, you can't improve on the absolute, therefore there would be nothing, there can be no gain. And then also I'd like to put out a shameless plug for Sunday,
Yes.
which where these matters will also be discussed, because it so happens that the introduction to the Secret Teachings of All Ages by Manly P. Hall is all about the historical philosophers, the best of them, including the Greeks and the Europeans, and the ideas that their best ideas, and we'll be looking at that on Sunday. So it's going to be the kickoff of a series that will last 427 years, and I hope to see all of you there.
Yeah,
you'll get an invitation.
That would be great. Francis is doing a wonderful job, and now the second, we're continuing with the Secret Doctrine, but now the Manly Hall, the big book, he's going to be working on that, and everybody is deriving a lot from being present at these webinars. So I encourage you to join us. And how do they, Francis? How do they get the link? Is it sent out to CC? Is that it?
If you're not included on one of my lists, which you very likely are, you can just go to themoriafederation.com as opposed to .net, which is the public portal, and under webinars you'll find it listed, and you can sign up that way.
That'd be great. And also maybe Joe or BL could send this out to our CC list, and that would cover a lot of people. We'd make sure that happens.
It has gone out on Constant Contact, and if you all will keep talking for just a couple of minutes, I can get the link and put it in the chat box too. And we have put in the chat box the reference that Stephen gave us to the ethics link on Amazon, or to get the PDF version that's free.
Oh, that's terrific. Yeah. It's useful. It doesn't have the color plates, but it has everything else. I use it so that I can copy paste content, and it's quite good.
Okay.
But there's nothing like having, the color plates is also useful. If you can afford the book, that's nice. Will be.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I say it's getting more expensive all the time.
Yeah. No, you really don't have to buy the book, because I also include the color plates in my presentation. So we'll be looking at those and the commentary on those plates in detail, and close-ups, etc. But this first session, we were talking about identicality, Kant's idea, and we get into that somewhat. It's interesting. A lot of people had no idea what he was talking about. So when you look for a description of what he meant by identicality, you can't necessarily trust it if it was written by someone who's not
who didn't understand. Yeah,
knowledge. They just say, well, he meant that everything was identical to everything else. Well, that doesn't really tell you much,
No. But we look forward to it. We look forward to it, Francis, and thank you for that. Now, look, there are a couple of more people, because I'm a little bit careful now that we may be going way over time. We seem to have Stephen, and we answered that, and then Walter, we seem to have answered something there. I'm not sure. Is that it?
I think you're covered.
Yeah, okay.
In terms of all the responses, and I'll just remind the group that this is early in the morning for Michael now, so a 2-hour webinar is a really good length because it takes you into the wee hours of the morning over there in Finland.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, this elaborate meditation that I planned is now turning into, let's all be quiet for a moment and just think of the words, naught is but me. Naught is but me. Now make sure you open your heart center imaginatively when you're doing this. And I would just suggest to fasten upon no form whatsoever, but in the presence of form or states of energy, to find something else. Something else is there, so to speak. Find that. And it doesn't make form disappear, but it introduces an all-pervading formlessness, which is an isness, which is felt within whatever chakra. I think the heart is good. And practice it during the day. And wherever you go, you might be in a line someplace, or you might be sitting on a bus or whatever. It doesn't make any difference qualitatively what you're looking at all. It makes no difference. Practice that mantram, and there will be other mantrams too. Okay, look, thank you. I'll keep sending this stuff to you as I refine it, and it kind of looks like there's a couple of people with whom I have to engage maybe in a conversation, which could take, a long time, because we're dealing with, like Voltaire said, if any man would converse with me, let him define his terms. Okay. So we have to define our terms. And then maybe, because if we have a 2-hour conversation, it could happen, and we can't do it, in a context like this. But I just want to say to everybody, lots of love, many blessings, and this is all about the curriculum of being, the curriculum of identification, as we keep on studying the relative curriculum of the ageless wisdom. And the farther we get with that, the more capable we will become with this one. So many blessings and all the best to you. And I'll get this converted. I'll send it to Joe and BL, and we'll get it up on Makara. And if you want to listen to it again, you can. Yeah, Joe, did you have something?
We have the 2 links, one for Secret Doctrine, the other for Manly Hall in the chat box. And people are saying, absolutely, thanks for this presentation. And then another comment, I really do not wish to be fried. I do at times feel scrambled and often wish to be just over easy. I always know the egg substance, the substance out of which I was born, though realizing this is a perceptual boundary, a ring pass not from which I shall hatch, grow, and grow on.
Oh,
Beyond that shell to lay future limited perceptual eggs until the old hen stops laying and I realize the yolk was always on me, perceiving myself as any egg at all. I am the entire farm and the farmer. And she just wants you to smile. Yes, Michael, we are beginning to get it. Thanks for your guidance.
that's
And
so,
that is from
that's
Suzanne,
so
who can always
clever.
give us a wonderful,
That's
wonderful
so clever.
comment.
I have to save that one. That's really good. Okay, thanks, Suzanne. Thanks, everybody. And look, we don't know where we're going, but there's nowhere to go anyway. So let's just keep identifying and learn the real act of it, not just the words around it, but let's really do it and keep doing it and practice a little bit every day. It's going to require practice. So here we go, and good night here from Finland. It's 1 o'clock. It's not too bad yet. If I was going by Tuya time, I couldn't go to sleep until 4:30 or 5. So I feel pretty lucky. She's away at the moment, and that means that maybe I get to go to sleep by 2 o'clock. So we'll see you later, and thank you, and bye-bye.